I didn't find out my wife of 28 years was cheating on me because of some hidden camera, a private investigator, or a carelessly misplaced cell phone. No. I found out because, for the first time in almost 3 decades, I heard my wife apologize to a man. And that man wasn't me. If you've been married long enough, you know that the true end of a relationship rarely comes with a loud explosion. It usually happens quietly, in the spaces between the words you stop saying to each other. I am 55 years old, a retired high school history teacher, a quiet man who spent his entire adult life trying to build a peaceful home. But peace was the one thing my wife, Brenda, absolutely despised. Brenda was the kind of woman who could find a flaw in a diamond with her bare eyes. Over the years, her personality hadn't just soured, it had turned entirely toxic. Nothing I did was ever enough. If I cooked dinner, the chicken was too dry, the potatoes too bland. If I cleaned the house, I used the wrong chemicals and ruined the air. She spoke to me not as a partner, but as an incompetent employee she was endlessly inches away from firing. Thomas, for God's sake, are you going to chew that loudly for the rest of your life? She would snap across the dinner table, her eyes narrowed with a disgust that cut straight through my soul. I used to fight back. In my 30s, I'd argue. In my 40s, I'd try to reason with her. By my 50s, with our 2 kids grown and moved out, I just took it. I walked on eggshells in my own home, swallowing my pride just to keep the peace. I loved her, or at least I loved the memory of the woman I married in 1998. But then came the summer we decided to rebuild the back porch. The wood was rotting and I wasn't young enough to haul the lumber myself. So we hired a local carpenter. His name was Marcus. Marcus was 52, built like a brick wall with calloused hands and a voice that sounded like gravel grinding under a heavy tire. He wasn't a wealthy contractor or some slick talker. He was just a hard-working, rough-around-the-edges guy who didn't take an ounce of disrespect from anyone. I was at the kitchen window making coffee the morning they first clashed. Brenda marched out onto the lawn in her expensive silk robe, holding a steaming mug, and immediately started barking orders at him. She pointed at a stack of oak planks, her voice dripping with that familiar condescending venom. "I don't want those stacked near my hydrangeas," she snapped. "Move them to the driveway, and try not to make a mess today. I have a headache." I braced myself. I waited for Marcus to lower his head, mutter an apology, and do what he was told. That's what I would have done. That's what every man in Brenda's life did. Instead, Marcus dropped his hammer. He slowly stood up to his full height, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and looked Brenda dead in the eyes. "Lady," Marcus said, his voice dangerously low but completely steady. "I'm the one building this deck, not you. I put the wood where I need it. If you don't like how I run my job site, you can fire me and build it yourself. Otherwise, take your coffee back inside and let me work." My heart jumped into my throat. I waited for the explosion. I waited for Brenda to scream, to threaten him, to tear him to shreds the way she did to me on a daily basis, but she didn't. I watched through the glass as a strange foreign color rose to Brenda's cheeks. She didn't yell. Her shoulders, usually stiff with rage, suddenly dropped. She looked down at her slippers, tucked a piece of blonde hair behind her ear, and spoke in a soft, submissive voice I hadn't heard since our honeymoon. "You're right. I'm sorry, Marcus. I'll let you work." She turned and walked back into the house, leaving me standing frozen by the coffee maker. "I'm sorry." 2 words she hadn't given me when she missed my mother's funeral. 2 words she withheld when she crashed my car. 2 words she never spoke. But she gave them to him, just like that. Right then, looking at the dirty, sweating carpenter through my kitchen window, a cold, sickening realization washed over me. I didn't have any proof yet. I didn't have a smoking gun. But looking at the way my deeply toxic, controlling wife just folded for a man who put her in her place, I knew my marriage was already over. I just needed to find out how far it had gone. After the incident with the woodpile, the atmosphere in our house began to shift. It was subtle at first, so subtle that if I hadn't been watching her like a hawk, I might have missed it. The first change was the silence. For nearly 30 years, Brenda's default state was noise. Complaints about the grocery store lines, grievances about the neighbors, relentless criticism of my clothing choices. Our house was usually filled with the sharp staccato of her discontent. But suddenly, as July dragged on and Marcus's truck appeared in our driveway every morning at 7 a.m., the house grew incredibly, hauntingly quiet. Brenda stopped yelling at me. She stopped noticing me entirely. It was as if I had become a ghost in my own home. I would walk into the kitchen to find her staring out the window, a faraway look in her eyes, chewing absent-mindedly on her lower lip. "Everything all right, Brenda?" I asked one Tuesday evening. We were sitting in the living room. The TV was on, but neither of us was watching it. She blinked, startled, as if she had forgotten I was sitting just 5 feet away. "What?" "Yes, Thomas, I'm fine, just thinking." She stood up quickly, smoothing down the front of her skirt, and hurried upstairs. I listened to her footsteps retreat, a hollow ache expanding in my chest. Then came the changes in her appearance. Brenda had always maintained herself. She was a proud, sometimes vain woman who wouldn't be caught dead at the supermarket without makeup. But around the house, she usually wore comfortable slacks and oversized sweaters. Not anymore. I started noticing her coming downstairs at 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes before Marcus was due to arrive. She would be wearing her expensive silk blouses, the ones she saved for dinner parties. Her hair, usually tied back in a messy bun, was meticulously styled. And then there was the perfume. It was a Tuesday morning. I was reading the paper at the kitchen island when she walked past me toward the back door. The heavy floral scent of her Chanel No. 5 hit me like a physical blow. She was going out to offer the carpenter a glass of iced tea at 8 a.m., wearing Chanel. "You smell nice," I said, trying to keep my voice light, masking the trembling in my hands. "Are we going somewhere today?" She stopped with her hand on the doorknob. She didn't turn around. Her back was rigid. "No, Thomas, I just felt like making an effort today." "Is that a crime?" The venom was back in her voice, sharp and familiar. I almost welcomed it. But it wasn't the controlling rage she usually directed at me. It was the defensive snap of a cornered animal. She walked out onto the porch. I stayed at the kitchen island, holding the newspaper, staring at the words without reading a single one. Through the screen door, I could hear the low rumble of Marcus's voice. I couldn't make out the words, but I heard the tone. It was dominant, almost dismissive. And then I heard Brenda laugh. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was a genuine, breathy laugh, a sound I realized with a crushing weight I hadn't heard her make in over 10 years. It was a girlish sound, completely at odds with the bitter, sharp woman I had lived with for decades. She was flirting. My abrasive, impossible wife was giggling like a schoolgirl for a man covered in sawdust who barely gave her the time of day. That night, she didn't come to bed until well past midnight. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling the empty space beside me. When she finally slipped under the covers, I smelled it again. Mixed with her expensive lotion was the faint, unmistakable scent of cedar wood and stale tobacco. Marcus smoked roll-up cigarettes. He always smelled of them in fresh-cut wood. My stomach churned. A wave of nausea so intense it made my eyes water hit me. I closed my eyes tightly, forcing myself to take slow, quiet breaths. I wanted to scream. I wanted to turn on the lamp, rip the covers back, and demand answers. I wanted to shake her and ask her how she could throw away 30 years for a man hired to fix a porch. But I didn't. Confronting Brenda without proof would be a disaster. She would turn it around on me. She would call me crazy, paranoid, pathetic. She would twist the narrative until I was the villain, gaslighting me until I apologized for daring to doubt her. That was her way. She needed to be in control. I couldn't just accuse her. I needed to know the truth. I needed to see it for myself. I needed the final, undeniable proof that the woman I married was gone. The opportunity presented itself on a Thursday. I woke up to the sound of heavy rain lashing against the bedroom window. The sky was a bruised, dark gray. It was the kind of downpour that meant no construction work could happen outside. Marcus wouldn't be coming to work on the porch today. Brenda was already awake, sitting at her vanity, brushing her hair with quick, agitated strokes. I could see the tension radiating off her shoulders in the mirror. She was frustrated. She was missing her morning fix. I suppose I'll go into town, I said quietly, pulling on my sweater. I need to pick up some soil from the garden center, and I might browse the antique mall. I'll probably be gone until the afternoon. Brenda stopped brushing. Our eyes met in the mirror. For a split second, I saw a flash of unmistakable relief cross her face, quickly masked by her usual scowl. Fine, she snapped. Just don't track mud into the house when you get back. And take your time, Thomas. I have a headache and I just want some peace and quiet. Of course, I replied. My voice was steady, but my heart was pounding a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I took my keys, got into my sedan, and drove away. But I didn't go to the garden center. I drove exactly 4 blocks down the road, parked behind the old community library, and turned off the engine. I sat there in the silence of my car for 20 minutes, listening to the rain tap against the glass, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years that I was just a paranoid, foolish old man. Then I pulled up the hood of my rain jacket, stepped out into the downpour, and walked back to my own house. I didn't use a tracker. I didn't have cameras wired to my phone. I just had the agonizing, slow walk through my own neighborhood, feeling like a trespasser in my own life. I approached our house from the back alley, slipping through the wooden gate and hiding inside our detached garage. I didn't have to wait long. 10 minutes later, Marcus's battered Ford pickup pulled into my driveway. He didn't park on the street like a contractor. He pulled right up to the front door. He didn't have his tool belt. He was wearing dark jeans and a black jacket, walking with the slow, confident stride of a man who owned the place. Before he could even knock, the front door opened. Brenda was standing there. From my spot in the dark, damp garage, I watched my wife pull a man who wasn't me into our home. I waited 5 minutes, letting the rain mask the sound of my footsteps. I used my spare key to unlock the mudroom door, pushing it open with agonizing slowness to avoid the hinges squeaking. The house was warm, but a cold sweat broke out on my neck. I crept down the hallway, the hardwood floors I had painstakingly restored years ago, now feeling like a minefield. I stopped just outside the living room archway. I didn't hear the sounds of a physical affair at first. What I heard was far worse. I heard conversation. He's pathetic, Marcus. Brenda's voice drifted out, dripping with that familiar, toxic venom. But this time, it wasn't directed at me to my face. 30 years of him just nodding his head. I tell him to jump. He asks how high. It makes me sick. He's not half the man you are. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the drywall. It felt like someone had driven a railroad spike through my chest. Then I heard Marcus's heavy, gravelly voice. Shut up about your husband, Brenda. I didn't come here to talk about him. I don't care about his problems. And frankly, I don't care about yours. You talk too much. I braced myself for the explosion. If I had ever spoken to Brenda like that, she would have thrown a plate at my head. She would have screamed until her throat was raw. Instead, there was a heavy silence, then the sound of glass clinking. You're right, Brenda said softly, her voice practically purring with submission. I'm sorry, Marcus. Here, drink your whiskey. That was the true betrayal. It wasn't just physical. It was the realization that I had spent 3 decades bending over backwards, swallowing my pride and destroying my own self-respect, just to make this woman happy, only to find out she absolutely despised me for it. She didn't want a partner, she wanted a master, and she had found one in the man building our porch. I stepped into the archway. They were sitting on the leather sofa I had bought with my first retirement check. Marcus had his heavy, mud-caked boots resting squarely on the mahogany coffee table Brenda used to polish obsessively. He was holding a glass of my good scotch. Brenda was sitting dangerously close to him, her hand resting on his knee, looking up at him with a sickening, devoted expression. Hello, Brenda, I said. My voice wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was just profoundly, terribly tired. Brenda flinched so violently she knocked the glass out of Marcus's hand. The amber liquid spilled across the rug she had once screamed at me for walking on with damp shoes. She scrambled backward, her face draining of all color, her eyes wide with a terror I had never seen before. Thomas, she choked out. Her voice trembled. She pulled her silk blouse tighter across her chest. Thomas, what are you doing here? What are... You went to the garden center. I didn't look at her. I looked at Marcus. I expected him to jump up. I expected him to make excuses or perhaps even take a swing at me. But Marcus didn't do any of those things. He slowly looked down at the spilled scotch, sighed heavily, and stood up. He didn't look guilty. He just looked mildly annoyed. He picked up his jacket from the armchair, slid his arms into it, and finally looked at me. Well, Marcus said, his gravelly voice perfectly calm. I guess the porch is done. He didn't apologize. He didn't offer any explanations. He didn't even look at Brenda. He just zipped up his jacket and started walking toward the front door. Marcus, Brenda cried out, the panic in her voice shattering the quiet room. Marcus, wait, where are you going? He paused in the hallway and glanced back at her. There was no love in his eyes. There wasn't even pity, just the cold, hard detachment of a man looking at a problem he was leaving behind. I'm going home, Brenda, he said flatly. I don't do drama. You and your husband can figure this out yourselves. I'll send the final invoice in the mail. And with that, the heavy oak front door clicked shut. The engine of his battered truck roared to life outside, and he was gone. The silence that fell over the living room was deafening. Just the sound of the rain beating against the windows and the ragged, shallow breathing of my wife of 28 years. I waited for the tears. I waited for her to fall to her knees, to beg for forgiveness, to tell me it was a mistake and that she loved me. That is what a normal person would do. But Brenda wasn't normal. She was toxic to her very core. As the reality of the situation set in, that her strong, dominant lover had just abandoned her without a second thought, her fear mutated instantly back into rage. Her face flushed, and she stood up, pointing a shaking finger at me. How dare you? She shrieked, her voice echoing off the walls. How dare you spy on me in my own home, creeping around like a pathetic little rat? You set me up, Thomas. This is your fault. If you were half the man he was, I wouldn't have... Shut up. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. I just spoke with a heavy, absolute finality. Brenda froze. Her mouth hung open. In 30 years, I had never told her to shut up. I had never interrupted her. You don't get to yell anymore, Brenda, I said softly, taking a step into the room. You don't get to complain about how I chew my food. You don't get to critique how I mow the lawn. You don't get to tell me I'm not man enough. I looked around the beautiful, immaculate house I had paid for, the home I had maintained, the life I had sacrificed my own happiness to build. I gave you everything, I continued, feeling a strange, hollow calmness washing over me. I swallowed my pride every single day just to keep you happy. And you hated me for it. You didn't want a good husband. You wanted a bully. I looked her dead in the eyes. The venom was gone from her face, replaced finally by the terrifying realization that her punching bag was walking away. Pack your bags, Brenda. I want you out of my house by tonight. Brenda didn't leave quietly. A woman who has spent 30 years thriving on conflict doesn't just pack a suitcase and walk out the door. For the next 2 hours, my house became a battleground. She tried every tactic she had perfected over our marriage. First came the rage, screaming that I was throwing her out onto the street, throwing a ceramic vase against the hallway wall, demanding half of everything we owned. When the rage didn't work and I simply stood there sweeping up the broken porcelain, she tried the tears. She collapsed onto the bottom step of the staircase, sobbing, telling me she didn't know what came over her, that Marcus manipulated her, that she was just feeling old and invisible. It was a masterclass in manipulation. 10 years ago, those tears would have broken me. I would have dropped the broom, held her, and apologized for making her cry. But standing there, looking down at the woman who had laughed at me with another man just an hour prior, I felt nothing. The reservoir of empathy I had kept for her was completely, permanently dry. I've packed your 2 large suitcases, I said, my voice empty of any emotion. Your sister said you can stay in her guest room. I've already called you a cab. She looked up at me, her mascara running, realizing for the very first time in her life that she had entirely lost control. The cab honked in the driveway. She stood up, grabbed her coat, and walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the brass handle, turning back to deliver one final venomous strike. "You're 55 years old, Thomas," she spat, her eyes cold and hard. "You're boring. You're weak. You are going to die in this house completely alone." I looked at her, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of the last 3 decades finally slipping off my shoulders. "I've been alone for 20 years, Brenda," I replied quietly. "At least now, it'll be peaceful." She walked out and the door clicked shut behind her. The divorce was not a grand, cinematic affair. There were no private investigators bursting into courtrooms with secret files. There were no millions of dollars fought over. It was just a slow, depressing exchange of paperwork between tired lawyers. We sold the house, my beautiful, immaculate house, and split the equity down the middle. She moved to a condo 2 towns over. I never asked if she tried to contact Marcus again. Frankly, I didn't care. I bought a smaller place, a little single-story ranch house with a modest backyard. It's been over a year now. I am 56. I don't date. I don't go out to bars trying to reclaim my lost youth. I just live my life. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and I walk into my kitchen to make a pot of coffee. I accidentally drop a spoon on the tile floor, and the loud clatter echoes through the room. For a split second, my shoulders tense up, my stomach tightens. I wait for the screaming. I wait for the sharp voice from the other room telling me how clumsy I am, how incompetent I am, how I ruin everything. But the screaming never comes. There is only silence, a beautiful, golden, unbroken silence. I take my coffee out to my small backyard. I sit on a wooden chair I built myself, imperfect, a little crooked, but sturdy. I watch the morning sun rise through the trees, feeling the cool breeze on my face. If you are listening to this and you are shrinking yourself down every single day just to avoid making someone else angry, if you are walking on eggshells in a home that you built, hear me now. You are not keeping the peace. You are just slowly burying yourself alive. It took me almost 30 years to learn that a marriage without respect isn't a marriage at all. It's a prison sentence. And the moment you finally stop apologizing for existing is the exact moment you start living again.